In the preceding lecture, we worked through Aquinas' concept of God's simplicity. Today, we're going to work at one more divine attribute, God's eternity. After this lecture, for our third visit, we will turn to Aquinas' understanding of Christ's incarnation. But today, we are working on Aquinas' understanding of God's eternity. Aquinas' understanding of God as eternal is foundational for very many of his theological views. The concept of eternity, as Aquinas understands it, also makes a significant difference to a variety of issues in contemporary philosophy of religion, including, for example, the apparent incompatibility of divine omniscience with human freedom, the apparent incompatibility of divine immutability with the efficacy of petitionary prayer, and many other things as well. But because the concept of eternity has been misunderstood in the recent past of philosophical discussion, or even dismissed as incoherent, for a long time, this divine attribute did not receive the attention it deserves from contemporary philosophers. Aquinas' interpretation of the doctrine of eternity is not original with him. On the contrary, it has a long and complicated history. By Aquinas' time, the classical place for the discussion of God's eternity was Boethius's definition, Boethius's description of God's eternity. So I'm going to begin this lecture with a brief exposition of the relevant texts from Boethius before presenting Aquinas' interpretation. Boethius was born into a wealthy family in Rome somewhere around the year 480 AD. His most famous work is The Consolation of Philosophy, but he wrote many other works of philosophy and theology. Many of the ideas and positions formulated by Boethius in areas as diverse as logic and theology, many of his ideas and positions were foundational for later thought. Boethius's influence on medieval philosophy is enormous. Until the mid-12th century, the medievals knew as much of Aristotle as they did know, largely through the translations made by Boethius. His commentaries and treatises were also used very widely, and they served to establish a basic Latin philosophical vocabulary. In some cases, his work is the principal source for later medieval developments, as in logic, for example. So for the scholastic period, Boethius was an authority, second maybe only to Augustine, among Christian philosophers. This is what Boethius says about eternity in his work, The Consolation of Philosophy. He says, that God is eternal is the common judgment of all those who live by reason. Eternity is the complete possession, all at once, of illimitable life. And in another place there, he says, this becomes clearer by comparison with temporal things. For whoever lives in time proceeds as something present from the future into the past. And there is nothing placed in time that can embrace the whole extent of its life equally. Indeed, on the contrary, anything placed in time does not yet grasp tomorrow, but yesterday it is already lost. And even in the life of today, you live no more fully than in a mobile, transitory moment. Therefore, whatever includes and possesses the whole fullness of illimitable life at once, and is such that nothing future is absent from it, and nothing past has flowed away, this is rightly judged to be eternal. And of this, it is necessary both that being in full possession of itself, it be always present to itself, and that it have the infinity of mobile time present to it. So let's have a look at Boethius's definition of eternity. This definition has its roots in Greek philosophical tradition, but this is what it is as it goes into the medieval Christian period. Eternity is the complete possession, all at once, of illimitable life. So there are 4 elements here, and each of them is important to focus on. Now, Aquinas clearly adopts the Boethian definition of eternity. In his great work, Summa Contra Gentiles, Aquinas says, God is not measured by time, nor can any succession be found in his being. Rather, he has his being all at once. And that's what the formula of eternity consists in. And divine authority bears witness to this truth. For the Psalm says, Thou, Lord, endurest throughout eternity. And in another text, in his Quaestiones Disputatae de Veritate, Aquinas says, it belongs to God to cognize future things as present, with certainty, as Boethius says, because God's gaze is measured by eternity, which is all at once. There are 4 elements in Boethius's definition, as I showed you in the preceding line, and we can take them one by one. It's clear, first of all, that on Boethius's definition of eternity, anything that is eternal has life. So eternal truth is just a different use of the word eternal. And the second, and equally explicit element in Boethius's definition, is the lack of limits. The life of an eternal God cannot be limited. It's impossible that there is a beginning to it. It's impossible that there is an end to it. Now, the natural understanding of that claim about limits is that the existence of eternal God is infinite in duration, unlimited either with regard to the past, unlimited with regard to the future. But that is not the sense of illimitable life at issue here, because there's more to eternity than illimitableness. There is also timelessness. You can see that the issue in that the definition of eternity includes timelessness by looking at that line of Boethius's definition, that there is a complete possession all at once of illimitable life. As Boethius's explanation of his definition makes clear, he conceives of an eternal entity as timeless because it has all its life at once. Nothing in time can do that. And he thinks of the timelessness of God as specified in his definition just by that phrase, then, the complete possession all at once. What Boethius says in the passage I quoted in a preceding slide, what Boethius says in that passage shows that something like the following thought leads to his use of the words all at once. A living temporal entity may be said to possess a life, but since the events constituting the life of any temporal entity occur in sequence, some later, some earlier, the temporal entity cannot be said to possess all its life at once. And since everything in the life of a temporal entity that isn't present is either past and so no longer here, or future and so not yet here, any temporal entity does not have the complete possession of its life all at once. So whatever does have the complete possession of all its life at once can't be in time. The life that is the mode of an eternal entity's existence is characterized not only by illimitable duration, but also by atemporality. So we have here an odd use of the notion of duration. And here it's important maybe just to give a word of caution. None of the medievals who accepted eternity as a real atemporal mode of existence meant to deny the reality of time. None of them meant to suggest that temporal experience is illusory. In introducing the concept of eternity, Boethius and all those who came after him, they were proposing two separate modes of real existence, two separate modes of duration. Eternity is a mode of existence that is not reducible to time, and it's also not incompatible with the reality of time. And here we can pause to think about what it means to be in time. There are two series that characterize time. Philosophers call them the A series and the B series. There are two series characterizing time, and these two series are generally called the A series and the B series. The A series is past, present, and future. The B series is earlier than, simultaneous with, and later than. You can see the difference this way. Christ's birth is earlier than his crucifixion. His crucifixion is simultaneous with his mother's presence to him at the crucifixion, and his death is later than his crucifixion. But all three of these are in the past. What is present is Christ being in heaven. What is future is Christ returning to earth. And in that future time of Christ's return, some events will be earlier than others, some will be simultaneous with others, and some will be later than others. But all those events around Christ's return to earth are future with respect to us. So that's a way to see the difference between the A series and the B series. But the thing to note here is that everything in time can be characterized by either the A series or the B series. Nothing that is eternal and outside of time can be characterized by either one of these series. There is no succession in timeless eternity. Temporal events are ordered successively in either the A series or the B series, but an eternal God can't be characterized by any succession. Nothing in God's life can be ordered in either the A series way or the B series way. Not only that, but in addition, no temporal entity, no temporal event can be past or future with respect to eternity. No temporal entity or event can be earlier or later than the whole life of an eternal God, because otherwise God would himself be part of a temporal series. So everything in eternity is present or now. Everything in eternity is simultaneous with all of life, with all of time. Nothing in God's life can be past or future with respect to anything else, either in God's life or in time, and nothing in God's life can be either earlier or later than anything else either. So the A series doesn't apply to God, the B series doesn't apply to God. There is no succession in the life of a timeless, eternal God. So here is the implication of all four parts of the definition of God's eternity. God's eternity is not just timelessness. Rather, eternity is a mode of existence characterized both by the absence of succession and also by limitless duration. God's life consists in the duration of a present that is not limited by either future or past. The concept of eternity, as Aquinas accepts it, is thus the concept of a life with infinite atemporal duration. That is, of course, hard to understand. Because an eternal entity is atemporal, there's no past, no future, no earlier, no later than, within the life of God. The events constituting the life of God can't be ordered sequentially from the standpoint of eternity. But in addition, no temporal entity or event can be earlier or later than, or past or future, with respect to the whole life of eternal God. So, since the mode of existence for an eternal God is characterized by this kind of presentness, the relation between God and anything in time has to be a mode kind of simultaneity. If anything exists eternally, it exists. But the existing of an eternal entity is a duration without succession, and because it excludes succession, it's not true to say of an eternal entity that it has existed or that it will exist. It only exists. It's in this sense that eternal entity is said to have present existence. But since that present is not flanked by past and future, this present of eternal God is obviously not the same as the present of time. Furthermore, the eternal, pastless, futureless present of God's life is not instantaneous. It's extended, because eternity, as Aquinas understands it, includes duration. The temporal present is a durationless instant, a present that can't be extended without falling apart entirely into past and future. The eternal present is by definition an infinitely extended pastless, futureless duration. So although the stipulation that an eternal entity completely possesses its life all at once entails that the life of an eternal entity has no succession, the definition of eternity does not rule out the attribution of presentness or simultaneity to the life and relationships of eternal God. Insofar as an entity is or has life, completely or otherwise, it's appropriate to say that an eternal entity has present existence, in some sense of present. And unless its life consists in only one event, or unless it's impossible to relate eternal God's life to any temporal entity or event, we need also to be able to consider an eternal entity or event as one of the relations in a simultaneity relation. And so Aquinas tends to emphasize presentness and simultaneity, or all at onceness, in talking about eternity. So, for example, Aquinas says, God's vision is measured by eternity, which is all at once. Consequently, all times and everything done in those times is subject to God's sight. Simultaneity is, of course, generally and unreflectively taken to mean existence at the same time. But to attribute to an eternal entity simultaneity with anything, we need a coherent characterization of simultaneity that doesn't make it just another temporal relation. For Aquinas' purposes, what's needed as regards a species of simultaneity is a simultaneity relation between two relata, one of which is eternal and the other of which is temporal. It has to be possible to characterize such a relationship coherently if Aquinas is going to be able to hold that there are connections between God and things in time. An eternal God can't be earlier or later than anything in time, and an eternal God can't be past or future with regard to anything in time. So if there's going to be a relationship between eternal God and what's in time, then it has to be a species of simultaneity. We can call this simultaneity relation ET, simultaneity. That's just a quick way of saying simultaneity between what is eternal and what is temporal. Every moment of time, as that moment is now in time, is ET simultaneous with the whole life of eternal God. Or to put the same point the other way around, the whole of God's eternal life is ET simultaneous with each temporal event as that event is actually occurring in the temporal present. These things are hard to understand, and I'm now going to work at helping a little bit to give us an intuitive feel for that. A rough image can help to make the point more intuitively available. So imagine two parallel horizontal lines. The upper one represents eternity and the lower one represents time, and presentness is represented by light. Then with regard to things in time, we might say that the temporal present is represented by a dot of light that moves along the line, which is lighted successively moment by moment. This upper line on your screen right here shows you the timeline with the present as a yellow dot, and the yellow dot will somehow move along the line. It says, as I say, a very rough picture, but it gives you something of the idea. Now that's what time is like for us. But with regard to God's eternal now, the entire timeline is lit up as yellow. For us in time, only one point on the line is yellow at once. For God in the eternal now, everything in that timeline is yellow. That is to say, as things in time become present, they are simultaneous with the one eternal presentness of God, which God has all at once. So here's a way to think about it. Once the doctrine of eternity is introduced, there are two different but equally real modes of duration, and presentness becomes relational. In relation to the unrolling of history, a moment of time may be not yet present, but in relation to the enduring and encompassing present of God's eternity, that same moment in time may be present to God insofar as one and the same eternal present is ET simultaneous with all of God's life. This is a picture of a Victorian English schoolmaster, theologian, and scholar. His most famous work now is his story, Flatland. So there he is, Edwin Abbott. In Edwin Abbott's book, Flatland, there's a square, a two-dimensional creature square, and that two-dimensional creature is living and intelligent. This square, we'll call the square Max. This square Max comes into conversation with an inhabitant of a three-dimensional world. And the person in the three-dimensional world, the three-dimensional person, we can call that person John. John, who's three-dimensional, is trying to explain to himself, trying to explain his world to his new friend, Max, the two-dimensional square. So here's a way to think about what's going on here. Abbott wrote his book to help us understand these peculiar divine attributes, such as the doctrine of eternity. And here's how he's trying to help us understand it. Imagine that this little diagram, which comes from Abbott's book, imagine that this is Max's whole world. He lives in a two-dimensional world, and he's two-dimensional himself. And now suppose we say to Max, suppose Max is right in the middle of his world, right here, and right here where the H is. And suppose that in Max's world, they call this place in their world here. And suppose that's where Max is, right there. And suppose John says to Max, hi. And Max says to John, where are you? And John says to him, I'm here. Then Max will say to John, no, you're not. You're not here. I'm here. And obviously, clearly, only one thing can be here at a time because here represents the middle of my world. Then John will say to Max, well, you're right in front of me anyway. And Max will say to John, no, I know who's behind me in line in my world, and it's Larry. It's not you. Oh, says John, you're all in front of me. Oh, says Max, did you just come into existence? And is that why everything in the world is in front of you? We're going to try to tell him again. No, Max, we in the third dimensional world, we are metaphysically bigger than you. Our here is so big that your whole world fits into our here. Every part of your world is here at once for us. And then Max will say to him, your position makes no sense at all. Only one thing can be here at a time, and I'm here. And now you can begin to see the issue. This is why Abbott wrote his story, to help us understand the issue. He made the point with regard to space, but we can also make the point with regard to time. God's mode of duration in eternity is metaphysically bigger than our mode of duration in time. It's analogous to the way in which a three-dimensional mode of existence in space is metaphysically greater than a two-dimensional mode of existence in space is. With respect to God in the eternal present, all of time is encompassed within God's eternal presence. All of time is ET simultaneous with the one eternal present of God's life. And so just as with regard to Abbott's picture of Flatland, you can connect to any spot in Flatland as here all at once, because your here is bigger than the here of Flatland. In the same way, God can connect with any moment in time as that moment is present, because God's presentness is so big, it encompasses all of time. That's the idea. So our experience of temporal duration gives us an impression of permanence and of persistence. But our existence as temporal creatures is spread over years of the past, through the present, and into years of the future. But the past is not, it's gone. The future is not, it's not here yet. And the present has to be understood as no time at all. The present, the true present, is just a durational instant, a mere point at which the past is continuous with the future. That is a fairly radical, limited, evanescent present. And it can't be the kind of present that God has. That makes no sense. So temporal duration is a kind of flickering image, you might say, where we think we have duration because we hold those instants of time together in our mind. But genuine duration, which is what God has, is fully realized duration. Not only extended existence, the way we have it maybe in time, but also existence, none of which is already gone and none of which is yet to come. And that fully realized duration just has to be atemporal, has to be timeless. So whatever has a temporal duration as its mode of existence is such that nothing future is absent from it and nothing past has flowed away. That's what Boethius says. Whereas of everything that has temporal duration, it may be said that from it, everything future is absent and everything past has flowed away. So to say of something that it's future is to say it's not yet. To say of something that's past is to say it isn't any longer. A temporal duration, by contrast, is duration none of which is absent. None of it is flowed away. And this way of thinking about time and eternity eternity, not time, is the mode of existence that admits a fully realized duration. Here is a picture of my granddaughter from some time in the past. She was so cute. And here's the point. When my granddaughter was an adorable little infant like that, she was very little. I don't know what she'll be like when she's in her old age, but I'm sure she'll be an elegant old lady. But here's the point. These are not parts of her life I can connect to now. Her baby years are lost to me because they're past. Her old lady years are not available to me because they're future. But an eternal God can be connected with all the parts of her life at once. None of the parts of her life are ever lost to him, just as you can be related to all the parts of things in Flatland all at once. So God can be connected to every part of my granddaughter's life, from babyhood to old ladyhood. I get her just a slice in the continuum of time at once. So here is the end of the story for today. The result of God's eternity is that in respect of time, God can be more present to a human person in time than any contemporary human person in time can be. As regards my granddaughter, I can be present only one time after another. Eternal God is present at once to every time of her life. None of her life is ever absent or unavailable to God. None of it is either past or future with regard to him. So the doctrine of eternity means not that God is distant from us. It means that God is more present to us than even we can be to one another in time. And with that, I am done.